Alright, let's talk about some of the more difficult things that come out on the reading passages. And I actually think this is difficult because there are so many examples of them, and some of them kind of sounds like they negate the other. And I'll explain what it means by, I'll give you a general idea of what they're saying and give you examples to help you understand this. So let's look at this. SATs and ACTs, they both ask you, I actually think it makes up 20 to 30% of the reading questions that come out. They mention things called literary techniques over here, literary techniques and devices. So, I guess the easiest thing to kind of understand what these things are, or easiest way, is by thinking about literal and figurative language, right? So, a lot of people say, he literally, asked me to marry her or something like that a million times. He literally asked a million times, right, if I could marry her. And that is probably gonna be a wrong statement, because you're not gonna ask a person something a million times. I mean, it's gonna be really hard to do that. Maybe you could get a computer to ask something a million times, but that's really not correct. That's something known as figurative language, right? And you probably know this from like a figure of speech, meaning it's not literal. Literal means like, let's say, I'm gonna kill you with homework, right? If that's literal, that means tomorrow you won't exist, right? But it's probably figurative speech, meaning like, I'm gonna give you a lot of homework. That's what it's actually saying. And I listed some of the more common literary techniques and devices that they use. All these over here, and some of them are actually really confusing. Some of the more basic ones that you guys probably know off the bat is like metaphor, the difference between metaphor and simile. And right away you probably know that simile has like or as. But not all similes do, actually, for some strange reason. But on the SATs or ACTs, that's all you need to know. It has to have like or as, and metaphor it doesn't, and I'll show you examples in a second. Another one that is confusing is maybe irony and paradox, right? People actually don't know the exact difference between them because they are so similar. That's why I actually think this is really tough. Or some other, if they give you a statement or a sentence, it could actually be both, right? But the both meaning like you get imagery and you also get a metaphor, right? But on the test prep questions or on the test questions, they won't give you something that's so ambiguous, right? Where it could be both. Or I didn't list it here. They'll give you something like personification, but personification and anthropomorphisms, they're actually different. They're actually different a little bit, and I'll explain how they're different. But you probably heard of other ones like onomatopoeias, right? They come out in comics and stuff, like pow and bam. Oxymorons are things that kind of contradict each other, which is maybe paradoxical, but maybe you have statements like very common one, jumbo shrimp. That would be an oxymoron. But in any case, let's look at the examples. So they'll basically give you a sentence like this, or they'll refer to a sentence. So in the question it says in line 2 or line 3, whatever it is, and they'll ask what literary technique did the author use, or what literary device, or basically what did the author do, and they'll give you examples of the ones that they want you to pick out of, right? So in this one it says Usain Bolt, the Jamaican sprinter, runs like a cheetah, the fastest land animal on record. So you could break down the sentence if you want, right? Usain Bolt, this is a positive. If you haven't learned what positives are by now, you can look in the other videos, right? Usain Bolt runs like a cheetah, and the hint right away over here is like. He runs like a cheetah. And which one of the literary devices can you pick out of this? Is it irony, something that's, ironic, would be, I don't want to say contrasting. Well, it's the opposite of what you would expect, right? I have a separate lesson on irony versus paradoxes. Is it a simile, which is the answer, right? Because it uses like or as, right? What is a personification, right? Personification is, well, there's the word person there, and fact, and phi, the suffix means make, and shun means noun, right? So personification means give human characteristics to things that aren't human, right? But we're not giving the characteristic. We're kind of comparing how fast, or not comparing with the cheetah. We're saying Usain Bolt's really, really fast, and he's like fast as a cheetah, right? So we're giving some kind of comparison, but we're not directly comparing to the cheetah. Figurative statement. Figurative statement would be something that's not literal, right? Something that's not literal. And the tricky part is the difference between B and D, right? That's what's tricky, because figurative statement is something that's not real. It's kind of hypothetical, right? So the answer could be B or D, but probably the better answer, right? The better answer would be simile, because they're giving you something like or as, right? But if they don't give you simile as an answer over here, it's probably best to pick D. And sometimes they'll do this. Sometimes you'll see like or as, right, in the question, but you're going to immediately look for simile, but it's not there. So it'll probably be a figurative statement. And there are questions like this on the SATs and ACTs, right? And it can't be E, paradox, because it's basically something very, very similar to an irony, except it's a little bit different. I'll explain that in a different video. So now let's look at the difference between the two sentences, right? We just had this one with like or as, right? Which is, we established that it's a simile, right? Like or as. What about this one? Usain Bolt, the Jamaican sprinter, is a cheetah, right? Is a cheetah. He is not a cheetah, right? That would be a hyperbole, right? That would be a, overstatement, or those kind of other literary devices that they would ask you about. But usually if they do something like he is something, it's what? You probably already know. It's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor. And the difference between metaphor and simile simply is what? All it does is it uses the word is. It is this or it is that, right? That's probably the difference that you need to note the most, right? When you are trying to learn the difference between metaphor and simile. Okay, let's look at this sentence. I am drowning in homework, right? And look at all the answer choices over here. I gave this example because this question would never come out on the SATs or ACTs, because it simply would not be fair. Everything is so close that, without a real clear distinction or knowledge of distinction, it would be difficult. And even if you see on the internet, there's debates for all these, because why? It could fit into every one of them, right? So I'm drowning in homework, right? You understand that, but are you literally drowning in homework, right? It can be a metaphor. Why? Because I am drowning, right? But you're not literally drowning, right? Metaphor is a comparison of, how much, how clear, or it's a comparison using is. It just something is, right? And I am drowning in homework, right? That would be metaphor. But it also would be a hyperbole, because hyperbole, hyper means above, right? Hyperbole, because it would be an exaggeration, right? You're not literally drowning in homework, right? An overstatement, which means the same thing as hyperbole, right? It's an overstatement. Right. What about a figurative statement? This is a figurative statement because it's not literal. If it's literal, that means you died from homework inhalation, or homework drowned you, right? That would make no sense. And it would also be imagery, because you get an image in your head. So what I'm trying to point out with this example is that SAT and ACTs will never give you an example like this, and you would have to pick the best one. And in my opinion, there is no best one, because you could fit every one of them into the example.